Connecticut has a long and tragic history of witch trials and public executions. In the late 1670s, then-Governor John Winthrop changed the laws, ending the horrific period in Connecticut's history. Or did he? Legends and myths of witch trials continued into the early 1800s. While these trials are not well documented, their stories were no less bizarre. From women turning into horses, to self-decapitating oxen, to the devil himself. Tonight we will be exploring the disturbing stories of the Bristol witches. I'm Chris.
I'm Kathy.
I'm Sean.
And this is Weirder After Dark. So today we're going back to Connecticut, guys.
Shocker.
Yeah, it's the quiet ones you got to watch out for.
Connecticut's weird. Connecticut's weird.
Small but powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we know that there's a population of people all over the world who still practice witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
We've met some of them. They're some of the coolest, kindest, most spiritual people I've ever met, in my opinion, right?
Yeah, we just had brunch with one last week.
Yeah, it was very cool.
Yeah.
So this ancient practice continues until modern day. Knowing this, do you think there's still small, extreme religious groups out there hunting and executing witches? Deep underground, not officially tied to the church, but still believing and being caught up in this battle between good and evil?
Think of all the stories that you don't hear that occur on a day-to-day basis. There's real life stuff happening out there that you just never hear of. So why not?
I strongly believe that just because we made them illegal doesn't mean they stopped right away. So Connecticut has some very well documented and researched witch trials starting back in the mid-1600s. Most famously was the case of Alice Young, who Kathy did an episode on a couple months ago. If you remember from the episode, Alice's family did not die of tuberculosis when so many of her neighbors did, and this caused her neighbors to accuse her of witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, her daughter was actually accused of being a witch as well.
Yes, because she looked so young for her age.
Runs in the family.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you also have Mary Johnson, who was accused of being witchcraft, and while being interrogated using torture, admitted to having sex with the devil.
What?
Well, I mean, they were using torture on her.
This resulted in her execution in 1650. Then you have Catherine Harris, whose husband passed away without any male heirs, causing her to inherit a large estate.
Oh, she's dead too.
Yep.
Yeah. When she was convicted of witchcraft, she had to forfeit her inheritance to the Puritan Church. We also have Goodwife Knapp, who was accused of witchcraft by her neighbor and executed in 1654. She maintained her innocence despite being tortured and proclaimed her innocence right up until the time of her hanging. In Connecticut, there are 47 recorded witch trials and 11 people executed.
I love the history of this. Confess, you die. Don't confess, you die.
Yeah.
I think these men are just really fucked up.
Preach.
They pretty much just like to torture women.
Also, we never published your episode on Goody Cole, but I'm so happy Good Wife is coming back.
Yes.
Good Wife.
That's such a good name. So in 1670, the then Governor John Winthrop, seeing innocent people being swept up in these superstitious raids and seeing the fallout from Salem, Massachusetts witch trials, changed the laws, eliminating charges of witchcraft from the book and declaring that the witchcraft hysteria was over. However, fear of witchcraft continued in Connecticut, and trials and executions no longer supported by the government might have continued underground. In fact, I think the governor then created a rogue vigilante justice completely under the full control of the church and probably much more dangerous and brutal form of witch hunts, right?
I see.
Which is kind of scary when you think about it. Somehow being off the books and unchecked by the law makes these stories even more terrifying. What could a preacher with unwavering faith be capable of without the restraint of his fellow man or the reason of law?
I'd like to think it gets worse, but it was already so bad.
Yeah.
It was bad.
Yeah, like to Kathy's point you said earlier, it was just say you're a witch, you're dead. You don't say you're a witch, you're dead.
Yeah.
Can it get worse even if it's illegal and they're going behind the back?
I will torture you until you admit to having sex with the devil, right?
Yeah.
The only way that it gets worse is at least before it was out in the public.
It was a trial.
And now people just go missing. People
okay, I guess it is kind of worse.
So I guess it's kind of worse for the people
who are dying.
Who are dying, but also for their family.
Yeah. There was no trial. There was no...
I mean, technically, there wasn't one before.
Well,
I hear you.
They're getting killed anyway, so yeah.
I see, though, but at least it was out in the public. We knew it was happening, and now people are just missing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we don't know that these trials continued after 1670 when it was declared illegal. The lack of documentation makes these accurate timelines and dates impossible to report. However, tonight, I want to take 3 such myths that I've found and weave them into one story. We do this to leave you one disturbing question. What horrors could faith and superstition create when left unchecked?
Ooh, I'm ready.
In the early 1800s, a young man by the name of King came to Bristol, Connecticut, to study to be a preacher under the tutelage of Pastor Elder Wildman. So Pastor Wildman was the town's Puritan preacher, as well as a well-established figure in town. Not much was known about the young man King. The records don't even know if this was his first or last name. Rather, just referred to him as just King. While keeping records was not an exact science in the early 1800s, King was especially unmentioned and mysterious. So to be clear, the exact timelines of these events have been lost to history, but we can be assured that strange things started happening in Bristol, Connecticut about the same time that King came to town, and ended soon after he left town. What is not speculation is that there was a man in town by the name of Truman Norton. Truman's daughter, Marilla, had been sick and in a lot of pain for several days. She could not sleep or eat. She could barely drink water. She didn't talk. She just tossed and turned, whining and moaning in pain. Truman called the town doctor, who could not help her. He then called the preacher, and the preacher came to pray, but that didn't seem to help either. Truman sat there day and night, hopelessly watching as his daughter's pain seemed to get worse with time. Truman had been putting off an out-of-town overnight trip for several weeks to look over his daughter. Not being able to postpone the trip any longer, he asked the neighbor's kid, Seth Stiles, to watch over her as he left town. Seth, who was barely older than Marilla, sat there in the room as she wailed and writhed in pain throughout the night. All he could offer her was a cold cloth soaked in water to apply to her forehead and a few reassuring words that she was going to be okay. Late into the night, Seth had dozed off in his chair. He had woken up by Marilla's terrifying screams of agony. Seth rushed to her bedside. What he saw next would haunt him for the rest of his life, as 3-inch-long metal sewing needles were somehow pushing their way out of Marilla's skin.
Oh, yeah.
Somehow an invisible force inside of her was pushing them out of her body. First 2.
Why were they in there to begin with?
You'll find out. Then 4. Then 10.
Oh,
Seth started to carefully remove the needles as they broke the surface of her skin.
Oh, I'm out. Yeah.
I'm just like, can you imagine like feeling it as you're like
Ooh.
pulling it and it's like coming through the
Okay, I'm
skin?
gonna vomit. No. Oh.
With the last needle removed, her pain seemed to subside. And as he dressed her newly forged wounds, Marilla spoke for the first time in weeks. She had quite a lot to say. She proceeded to tell Seth that this all started several weeks ago. She had gone against her aunt's instruction and had blown off chores assigned to her. Instead, she went to the lake with a friend for the day. She went on to explain, when I got home, my aunt was furious with me. And strangely, my aunt's eyes were not right. Somehow they were dark and more vacant. My aunt started chanting at me in some sing-songy nonsense or some language I could not understand. I was scared. I pled with her to stop, but she just kept chanting. In fact, it got louder and louder. I remember feeling this terrible fear. This guttural dread came over me. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to promise to complete the chores, but all of a sudden I was so tired, I could barely keep my eyes open. I could barely keep myself upright. I stumbled to my bed and fell asleep before my head even hit the pillow. If this was not strange enough, I woke up later that night, not in my bed, but now in the barn. I looked over and I saw my aunt. She had a saddle in her arms and that same crazed look in her eyes. She wandered over, and then she threw the saddle on my back and climbed on top of me. It was at this moment I realized I was no longer my body. Rather, I was in a horse's body. I mean, I was me, but I was a horse as me. The whole thing was so disorienting. The next thing I remember, I was running through town, my aunt spurring me to go even faster. It was dark and foggy as I ran as fast as I could. I was watching the familiar homes and buildings of town from this very unfamiliar form and perspective. It was all so strange. Exhausted and gasping for breath, we finally slowed down several miles outside of town. We stopped near 2 giant boulders in the woods. My aunt got off the saddle and hooked my bridle to a tree. I tried to break loose, but without arms and hands, it was useless. I was completely helpless.
This aunt's fucked up, all right? She doesn't listen. She doesn't do her chores. Sure, turn her into a horse. I get it. I get it. I get it. But then to ride her, that's messed up. That's where I draw the line. That's messed
abuse.
up. Yeah.
Put her in the barn for the night.
Yeah, gosh.
Oh my God.
So I watched my aunt walk and join a small circle of 12 other women, about 20 feet from where I was tied. They started a small fire next to 2 giant boulders. And then they gathered around the fire. All the women started to chant in that same strange language I couldn't understand earlier that day before I fell asleep. The chant grew louder, and the women started convulsing and jerking in violent and unnatural movements. At this point, I couldn't break loose, but I was too scared to move as well. I just watched in disbelief and horror. The chanting grew louder and louder, and all of a sudden, the small fire burst towards the sky, reaching the top of the treetops in a brilliant, blinding light. Then I heard it, a deep guttural growl, an unnatural noise, something evil, something not of this world. I looked away. I was too scared to look up. I was frozen with fear. I could just hear the chanting, the cries of joy, the moaning with pleasure, the deep unnatural growl. I don't know if it was hours or minutes that passed. I know all of this sounds crazy, but it's as real as I'm sitting here now. The next thing I knew, I was back in my bed and I was in dreadful pain. So Seth, now processing what he just heard, was in full-blown
How do you
panic.
process that? This is batshit crazy, right?
Yeah.
But he just pulled needles out of this girl's body. So,
Yes.
like, at that point, you got to be like, anything's on the table. There were needles inside of you. Like,
Yeah, like where'd the needles come from?
yeah, so many questions.
So you have to remember, Seth grew up in a Puritan community where the devil and witchcraft was real. So he was hearing a story about witchcraft, Satan, and then the pins coming out of her skin. He didn't know what to do. He did know he did not like the sewing needles now sitting on the bedstand,
Me neither.
stained
I
in
wouldn't
blood.
either.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, they were not okay.
I'm sorry.
They
I
were
would
not okay.
I would take that like wet cloth, tap her on her head a few times and be like, good luck.
Well, Seth's a little braver than you.
So in moments of crisis, it's not Sean to call on.
If there's needles coming out of your skin, yeah, don't call me, please.
So Seth grabbed the needles and he threw them into the fire. This act of getting rid of the needles somehow gave Seth a sense of control back, and with Marilla's ease from her pain, he felt like things were going to be okay for the first time since he walked into that bedroom that morning. Both exhausted from the ordeal, they fell asleep.
Everybody just goes to sleep.
I mean, it's got to be exhausting pulling needles out of some chick.
Or transforming into a horse.
Yeah. It's a lot.
There's a lot happening here.
So the next day, Truman returned to Seth sleeping on the floor and his daughter sitting up in the bed. However, his relief with his daughter's recovery was short-lived as she retold her story of the needles and her aunt and the devil to her dad. Truman, being a good, God-fearing Puritan, went to confront his sister for her wicked witchcraft.
So this is his sister.
His sister, yes, her aunt. Walking the few blocks from the house, his anger and rage grew. By the time he got to the house, he threw the front door open and demanded to see her at once. She did not answer. He stormed through that small house. He threw open the door to the bedroom. There she was, still under the covers, still sleeping, clearly still resting from her wicked deeds. He walked over to the bed and pulled down the covers to find his sister's charred and burnt remains.
What?
The body was so badly burnt, he did not recognize it at first. But there she was, or at least there she used to be, just now charred and burnt corpse.
Oh my God, did the boy do it?
Could the magic of the needles being thrown into the fire somehow have caused her violent end? Could her dark magic have somehow turned on her? Truman ran straight from the house to the church to find Pastor Wildman. The pastor would know what to do. He would know how to make sure this evil was expelled and gone forever. Pastor Wildman listened carefully as Truman recounted his daughter's bizarre story and how he found his sister's charred body in her own bed. The pastor was well aware of the devil and witchcraft and the danger of evil in his small town. However, he was also aware of the law and the illegal nature of holding witch trials. He told Truman they both needed to go home and pray for guidance, and answers would become clear tomorrow. Truman, a good, God-fearing Puritan, obeyed the pastor's orders and went home to pray. Pastor Wildman went home that night to pray for guidance. As he knelt in reverence, he asked for divine guidance. He was interrupted by his oxen making a ruckus in their pen. He tried to return to his prayers, but the oxen continued to kick and moan. He took a break from his prayers and took a candle outside to go check on the beasts. When he approached the pen, the two oxen seemed to be okay, just nervous and worked up. He checked around the pen to see if there were coyote or bear tracks. He couldn't find anything. As he stood there in the dark, alone, only lit by one dim candle, one of the oxen started to float in the air.
What?
It was almost suspended in the air several feet off the ground and turned slightly on its side, almost like it was being held there by some invisible force. Then in one clean movement, the invisible force pulled the oxen's head clean off.
No.
Whoa.
He watched as the 1,000-pound floating oxen self-decapitated, and the head and body fell separately to the ground with a mighty thump. The pastor knew at that moment the Truman story was real, and the evil had come to his town. The law was the law, but he answered to a higher authority. He needed to act. After an unrestful night with little sleep and a morning of prayer, he knew exactly what to do. He recruited his young apprentice King. They quietly and behind closed doors started their investigation. Through questioning and interrogating the devout members of town, they were able to track down all 12 of the remaining witches that Morel saw that horrifying night in the woods. That night, one by one, they were able to find, confront, accuse, and sentence each of these witches to death. The bloody, violent murder spree took Pastor Williams and King through the entire night into the early morning hours.
Whoa.
Bludgeoning, burning, strangling.
Oh.
Each witch to the evil was extinguished, and the devil had been pushed out of town. The killing spree ended the next morning, and King and Wildman returned home.
You just killed 12 women and he's just like, I'm going to go home now. I'm tired.
Well, Wildman all of a sudden was bothered by how much King seemed to enjoy the violence. King even encouraged Wildman to inflict more pain and unnecessary anguish in the night's deeds. Even stranger, King did not show up to work the next day. In fact, it seemed like he skipped town altogether. This is when Pastor Wildman realized the dark and twisted truth. King had a satanic hold over Wildman. King was, in fact, the king of the demons. He was the fallen angel, the trickster. He was the devil himself, and he had coordinated all of it. Pastor Williams, no longer worthy of his title as a holy man, packed a small bag, left town, and was never heard from again.
What a turn of events.
And this is the unofficial Bristol, Connecticut witch trials.
That is so good.
Yeah.
Oh.
So, like, the whole time, the pastor thinks that, like, no, King is a good man, and really, he's like the devil himself, basically.
So this is 5 or 6 different myths that I took that have happened over about a 60-year period of time and made into one story.
Okay.
So the pins coming out of the skin was not related to them finding the burnt witch. So all of these stories were just myths and legends that have come out of that area.
Okay.
That I spun into one story. But all of the facts from the story are actually from myths and legends.
Okay. And all associated with this King guy?
Yeah. Now, he was in town for a decade. And then after he left,
like everything,
the
like,
witchcraft started to settle down, yes. So what can we say about these stories that are actually true? We can say for sure that Connecticut had a very real history of executing people accused of witch trials. We can say for sure that in 1670, Governor John Winthrop made witchcraft trials illegal against the wishes of the Puritan Church and the faithful followers. We can also accurately report that these 2 giant boulders where the 13 witches were conjuring the devil does actually exist. And to this day, it's nicknamed Witches Rock. It's a popular place for teenagers to party and paranormal investigators to visit. As far as our stories from tonight, there are no public records, no public trials. Anybody who knew about these events were complacent in their execution, so nobody ever officially went on record. These events, if real, now only exist as stories and legends and rumors. They spread through word of mouth and were passed down quietly amongst the generations, leaving us to guess what really occurred in the town of Bristol that year. So tonight we went back to the olden days, the 1800s. But now I want to take you back to the olden days of the 1990s.
The 1990s?
1990s.
When we were in like middle school and high school?
In the 1990s, when I took a 5th grade civics class, where we learned about the amendments to the Constitution and the separation between church and state. Now, the Founding Fathers put this one first. It's the First Amendment. There's a reason for that, right? The church in some communities up to this point acted as if they were the government. The church would distribute land, hold court hearings, make decisions about public projects. Church was the biggest competition the government had at the time. This amendment guaranteed the right to practice religion without government interference, but it also took a lot of power away from the church and gave it to the U.S. government. To believe this happened with any resistance or pushback from the church, I think makes a nice story, but I think is entirely false. So for me, I believe most myths are rooted in some truth. I also believe that the ranks of the Puritan Church believed that they answered to a higher authority than the law or the government, would have a moral imperative to continue to hunt and punish witches as they saw fit. If there are actual stories of illegal witch hunts, they would not be recorded at this point. They would be kept quiet, and they are now lost to time. So we can only guess to the horror and terror that could have taken place as holy men carried out their religious orders to cleanse the area of witchcraft under the cover of night. What I don't believe is just because the governor said so, we put to rest thousands of years of superstitious belief that were backed by the authority of the church in one fell swoop. I strongly believe that these trials went underground and continue for generations, possibly even to this day in small sects and groups of religious extremists. So I don't think that these trials will go away that quickly.
There is a theory that, like, down in New Orleans.
Louisiana.
Yeah, the voodoo, witchcraft and all of that stuff, like, still just so deep in their culture that, like, people, as much as they practice it, there are people that are against it. So maybe.
I mean, after the Salem witch trials, government started to put, the colonies started to put in rules saying, okay, this is ridiculous, we've got to stop. But they didn't do it all at once.
Yeah.
Different colonies did it at different times, and I can't believe that people would just give up on that just because the government said, okay, this is what we do next.
Well, yeah, that's why I think, like, maybe back then it was more likely to happen.
I mean, you still see things pop up.
I mean, there are hate groups, so
yeah,
everywhere.
You see things pop up all the time for, like, civil rights, people committing crimes against minorities. It was just in late 2000s, early 2010s times that being gay became legal, and you still have people committing heinous acts against these groups. So
that's true. I have to ask our friend Jason. We travel, and we were talking about like where we want to go, and I asked him about like a certain destination. And I was like, can you go there? And he's like, yeah, I want to. And I was like, no, I mean, like, can you?
Yeah, is it legal to be gay in this country?
Yeah, right? He's like, it's literally legal to like stone me in the streets. And I'm like, oh, we won't go there.
Yeah. So like, I mean, you start putting that lens through it, all of a sudden it's like, that could totally have happened.
Possible.
Chris, first off, brilliant job weaving legends into like a straight narrative tale. Like I can only imagine how hard it is. What were the separate stories? Was it like the needles, the turning into a horse, and what was the other one?
So yeah, there was
oxen.
There was a story about King coming to town and King being the devil.
Okay.
But the pins coming out of the girl who was sick, and then there was women who were saying that they were turned into horses and made to run all night.
Oh wow!
I think they just didn't want to do chores. Oh
my god!
And then the oxen decapitating himself in front of the preacher kind of made the preacher start to believe that some of this was true. Everything else was just basically made up to fill in gaps.
I just can't get over the needle part.
Oh yeah, that's like, a little freaky. Yeah. I got a little graphic.
It was brilliant, though. I was drawn in. Yeah. You definitely brought those to life for sure.
I think too, it goes to like speak people's religious beliefs were so strong to believe that needles could be coming out of someone, or these girls are really being turned into horses. That like that's the devil. It's so ingrained into you believe in God that.
There are people.
You think that the devil like that is real.
There are people today that have excommunicated their children because they were gay.
Yeah.
And that's an offense against God in their belief system, which I read the Bible. I don't remember that part, but okay. Yeah.
When you were telling the story, Chris, the whole part about the being turned into a horse and then being ridden to this like event where there's summoning happening, I couldn't help but think about like the symbolism. And I don't know how much this is the story or your writing, so kudos if it was your writing. But think of being young and not in control of your life. You want to go to the lake, but someone's forcing you to do something. Yeah. And then you get changed into a horse where you have to do whatever the master tells you to do. And then they physically ride you to a destination and tying you to a tree. And then you have to do nothing but just watch. Like, I was like, oh, wow, that goes so deep to like
being helpless. And being controlled by other people and forces around you.
And there's a lot of Sigmund Freud in that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I have no control of my life. I'm a young girl, and this is how it manifests in a dream.
So cool. Masterful job of taking some legends, forming them into a beautiful narrative, leading into some deeper questions. So great job, Chris.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. I loved it. I enjoyed it. And gang, we hope you enjoyed it as well. If you did, feel free to go ahead and check out our Instagram. That is @WeirderAfterDark, where Chris will be going ahead and putting some images to support his story today. And it's not just Instagram. We are out there building some community. Visit us over at Reddit, Instagram, and Facebook, where you can talk to not only us, but other listeners who are enjoying these stories just like you. And remember, we are always on the hunt for some other local New England stories. So if you've got a legend or tale that you want us to share on a future episode, or if you have a weird little spooky happening of your own, have you been turned into a horse and ridden? I'm going to let that linger. Have you? Because we want that story. Unless it's weird and sexual, then we don't want that story, and then don't send it to us. But if you do have some weird New England tales, you can send it to us at thegang@weirderafterdark.com.
And if you've been to Witch's Rock and you've had some strange experiences, please let us know.
I want to hear about that.
Bet that better than the horse thing.
And if you're hunting witches now, please stop.
Please stop. And remember, if you are liking this shit, if you are absolutely loving this shit, the best thing that you can do for us is go ahead and leave a 5-star review wherever it is that you're listening. And as always, don't forget, it always gets a little weirder after dark.
Bye.
Not witches.